Welcome to the Investor Coaching Show. Here's your host, Paul Winkler.
And welcome to the Investor Coaching Show. I'm Paul Winkler. We talk about the world of money and investing here and what's going on in the world today that affects money and investing, financial planning, quality of life. And I am absolutely thrilled today to have as my guest Dr. Art Laffer. You've probably heard of him. I'm guessing a lot of my listeners are very familiar with his work. Legendary founder of Supply Side Economics. He was the economic advisor to President Ronald Reagan, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, and was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Donald Trump in 2019. Now, first off, in your office, I had to go to the restroom before we get on here. And what do I see on the wall but the Laffer Curve, which I was an economics major. So, of course, we had to study the Laffer Curve. And I thought it was interesting because every place that I'd ever seen it before, the way the curve looks is like this. It's a mound. And, it goes up and down. And then in your book, it was the other way.
Yes.
Why?
Now, you really want the answer?
I really do.
I want it to be memorable. I'm a professor. Remember that I teach all the time, and it's not politically correct anymore, but a shape like that for the students is very memorable because it looks like a bosom. Yeah. Now, there was one in the bathroom there that was a cartoon done that has it as a lady on there, and the guy looks at this lady on the beach with her bikini on,
there you go.
And he thinks of the Laffer Curve, which is exactly the opposite of what I thought. What I thought is I wanted him to have the Laffer Curve and then think of a girl in a bikini.
Because I was actually a little bit upset.
Remember it.
I was upset at my professor at first when I saw it in your book. I thought they've been teaching me this wrong the entire time.
Not wrong. It's not wrong. It's right either way. It just depends on switching the axes. Yeah. But the reason I do these things that way is to try to be memorable. I tell jokes to my classes, all of that, to give a break up and make seriousness all the time bores the heck out of students and they leave the room and don't remember anything. But if you remember a joke or this or an example, and a pedagogic device like the Laffer Curve is a very simple device that shows you something that's really obvious, but you remember it. And obviously, people remember the word, the Laffer Curve. How the heck that ever happened is beyond me. It's like Rubrich's cube.
It was your birthright.
But they do remember it because of the way I designed it.
Right.
And I do that with all sorts of things in mind that I did. I have all sorts of stories, examples, jokes, but all of that just to get people to transfer the information. Because it's not hard if you're paying attention.
Right.
If you tax people who work.
Well, right.
And you pay people who don't work.
Right.
What do you think's going to happen?
Well, they're
Duh.
Yeah.
A lot of people are not going to work.
Yeah, you're not going to get out there and
These are
work.
the examples I want to make come across. Economics is all about incentives.
That's why I thought it was so fascinating, because it made sense to me.
Yep.
That's why I loved economics as a major in economics.
Well, it should, unless you go to Harvard or Yale or Princeton.
Well, yeah, then it doesn't make any sense.
Then it doesn't make any sense, but they don't want it to.
Yeah, well, then you get into your book. And that's one of the things I want to bring up. He's got a great book, and I'm telling you, if you are interested in this topic, taxes have consequences, this is a great read. I was really enjoying it because as I was looking at it, I was wondering, how did you come up with the idea? And you get into a little bit of the history of, the wealth of nations, for example, Adam Smith, and how if you reduce taxes, you can increase output and a little bit of that. But that was pretty audacious at that time to say, hey, if we reduce taxes, we can actually increase revenue.
Yeah, tax rates and revenues, it's not obvious.
No,
it's not. And everyone understands it in microeconomics. You can way overtax a product and have so low sales that you make no money.
Right.
You can way underprice a product because you have it so cheap and everything like that, that even if you sell a lot of them, they still go bankrupt because they don't make any money per unit. There's a perfect price in there for a businessman to sell his product to maximize revenues. And those revenues are profits. Let me say profits. Because, the profits are the lifeblood. And how long you keep it at that price matters. The competition matters, the size of the product. All of these things matter. And same thing as the macro level. But they never used it in the macro, Paul. And that's what really got in the 1970s when I lectured on this stuff. Everyone understood it in microeconomics, but no one understood it in macroeconomics. It hadn't been used that way for eons.
So is that why when you were dealing with state economics, you talked a lot about that with Rex Sinquefield. You had been talking a little bit about the different entities around the country, different states around the country, and different localities. And when they raised taxes, it actually slowed down economic growth in those areas.
Well, again, just to use the example I use with my students. If you have two locations, A and B, if you raise taxes in B and you lower them in A, producers and manufacturers and people are going to move from
B to A.
I mean, it ain't rocket surgery.
Right.
Everyone understands. You can change the location of income, taxes by states, cities, whatever. You can change the volume of income, the Laffer curve and all that. You can change the composition of income. If you tax certain items more than other items, people will shift from getting capital gains or getting ordinary. They can do all those shifts. And lastly, you can change the timing of income.
Right.
Let me give you a beautiful example of that. Reagan signed a tax bill in 1981, but the tax cuts were phased in.
Right.
The tax cuts actually began on January 1st, 1983, because we had a 1.25% cut in 81, a 10% cut in 82, and a 20% cut on January 1st, 1983. Now, if you know that they're going to defer taxing, that taxes are going to be a lot lower in the future than they are now, what do you do?
I'm going to wait, and I'm going to take the income later.
You postpone your income and accelerate your costs.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Which is exactly what happened. In 1981-82, we had a deep recession, whatever, purely and simply because people deferred their income to January 1st, 1983. On January 1st, 1983, not January 3rd, not December 26th, but January 1st, the economy goes boom right through the ceiling.
That's when it takes off.
It's amazing to me how tax cuts don't work.
Yeah.
Until they take effect.
Well, of course.
And then they really work.
Well, then, and you made an interesting point in your book that fascinated me, that the wealthy, 20% of their income typically went to taxes regardless of what the tax regime was. That was fascinating.
Well, it's even
they stayed
worse
in the
than
same
that.
place.
It's even worse than that. If you go through their 20% of their income goes to taxes. That's true.
Right.
But their reported income is way below what their real income is.
Right.
Because of taxes.
They're hiding it.
Well,
and that's
they're
we're
not
talking
hiding
about
it.
that.
They're just using the tax laws legally and correctly. I did a piece on Warren Buffett, and I love Warren Buffett, and what he does is perfectly legal. I admire him.
Sure, he does. Yes.
But in 2010, he reported income taxes of being, I think it was a little less than $7 billion. He said he paid less in taxes as a share of his income than anyone else in his office, 22 people. I think it was 17.4%. So I took his income, taxes of $7 million, a little less than that, by the way, but divided by 0.174. And I came up with his taxable income of $39, $40 million. A lot of money. And then I took the deductions there, and I got his adjusted gross income of $62 million, but divided by 0.7, okay?
Okay.
And then I looked at his real income by Haig-Simon definition, which is how much did he spend, how much did he give away, and what was his increase in wealth. That's his income for that year. And if you look at that year, I assumed he spent nothing. He's a tightwad, a lovely man.
Lives in the same house he had for,
eats
forever.
Hamburgers like I do. Just a
Sure
great
thing.
guy. Just a great guy.
Yeah.
And then he gave away, I figured something like about $2.5 to $3 billion. All right. That's the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He has two sons who have foundations, a daughter with a foundation, and a wife with a foundation. So he has all these foundations he gives to. He may give to others as well. And then I looked at the increase in his wealth, and all of his wealth is in Berkshire Hathaway. So therefore, you can find out what it was from Forbes at the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And his wealth increased that year by $10 billion, from 40 to 50 billion. That was his wealth increase. And then if you look at it, he actually had income, Haig-Simon again, of about 12 or 13 billion, and paid less than 7 million in taxes. Now that comes out to an effective tax rate of 0.0006.
Right.
6/100ths of 1% of his income in taxes. All legal, all perfectly fine, all brilliant, wonderful. Because of taxes, he's able to do all these things. Now, if we had a low-rate, broad-based flat tax with no deductions, exemptions, exclusions, omissions, or anything, and just that, at a very low, we'd collect a lot more money from him. He'd report all of his income fair and square.
Sure.
And what we do in the book is we show clearly all the deductions, exemptions, exclusions that they've used from the beginning of the tax, the second chapter. Fun stuff, by the way.
It's great stuff. I love it.
And then you look at all the reported income and what it would, and what happens to sheltering when you raise tax rates. And people shelter the living hell out of it. When you raise tax rates on the rich earn less, and they do. It hurts them. Less capital gains, less all dividends, all that. They do earn less, but what they do earn, they shelter like mad. And you get the economy underperforming, you get the poor damaged badly, and you get tax revenues going down.
And I thought it was fascinating. You talked a little bit about how when the tax rates were so high, 60%, even up to the 90% range, how it was that the tax laws were not necessarily enforced during that period of time.
They hire great people in the IRS. The IRS is a wonderful institute, really substantive institution like the OMB.
Right.
But they hire them. And once they got them really well trained,
then they go to work for the
of
people.
course they do. They get paid. We found out
so
that
right.
Secretary whatchamacallit under Roosevelt, so they paid 10 times as much in the private sector to hire IRS agents to work against the IRS there. I mean,
who was Carter's advisor? You said that they said, "Hey, there's a way around this. Just earn less."
Yes, that's a cute one, isn't it?
Yeah,
yes.
that was a line that you think, no. That
But
doesn't seem
Morgenthau
like
was
a
the
good
amazing
idea.
one. Morgenthau was the one who said, all they do is we keep hiring and training IRS agents to have them then go to work for the private sector.
That's exactly right.
But a low-rate, broad-based flat tax, that wouldn't happen.
And that's the closest you came to that was under Reagan, because you had those two tax rates we got to, 15 and 28%.
We went
from
11 tax brackets to 2.
Right.
28 and 15. That's it. We were so close to the ideal. I did Jerry Brown's flat tax when he was governor of California running for president. And we put in my exact plan there. And he went from 8th in the race to 2nd in the race. He would have beaten that blue-eyed son of a gun from Hope, Arkansas, Billy Clinton. Remember him sucking his lower lip?
Yes.
We would have beaten him if he hadn't announced Jesse Jackson as his running mate. Jerry Brown was the best presidential candidate I've ever seen in my life.
Now, a question for you. And when it comes to companies actually avoiding taxes and things that they can do, I remember Buffett had this whole thing about it. You've got company A, company B. Company A lends company B money. Company B lends company A money. And when they repatriate, they don't have to repatriate the money and bring it back to the United States and pay taxes. So that's one the way they avoid things. Now, you also talk in a little bit in the book about companies setting up shop overseas. Are there a lot of places that they can set up shop still and be able to avoid taxes? And are other countries so similar to our tax rates that there are not a lot of places to hide anymore?
Let me put it this way, that prior to the Trump tax cut, which was spectacular. He dropped the highest rate from 35% to 21%, did all this other stuff, lowered the income tax, got tax exempt pass-through corporations, and, got rid of the ACA mandate and all of these other wonderful things. What happened in there, the salt deduction was great. All that. Before that, companies had divisions abroad that withheld the taxes over there.
Right.
Trump also gave a very preferential tax rate to repatriating funds, which they repatriated huge amounts of funds. They did it just before the end of 2017. So there was a huge surge of income in the last couple of weeks of 2017 from repatriated funds. It was this that really pushed us way over the top, and we increased revenues from the Trump tax cut by a huge amount. But he pulled back I don't know what the recent numbers are on foreign-held profits, non-repatriated funds, but Trump really brought them all back.
Well, one of the things you talked about in there, and I'm just kind of curious a little bit about this, is we talk, actually another thing that I want to bring up.
Sure.
And I know you're going to have an opinion on this, because you had said something, we had been talking at one point in time, you talked about how frustrating it was for you talking to politicians and saying, hey, here's what we ought to be doing, but you're not doing this. Why are you not doing this? And one of the things that I thought was, you look at the media. And you have so many politicians so scared of what the media is going to report on them that they're not willing to say anything about tax cuts or anything like that. And I look back at deregulation of the media, when it used to be you'd have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different media outlets, and then all of a sudden they got bought out, and they're just very few.
I remember you saying this in the email to me.
Yes.
Let me, if I can, I don't think you're right on that.
No, I don't. I reserve the right to be wrong on that.
No, me too. I'm wrong a lot.
Yeah,
but
I'd
you
be
know
curious.
the people who aren't wrong? The people who do nothing.
Well, true.
They're the only ones who are never wrong.
Well, I had enough. I couldn't do anything about this, but I was so curious about your opinion on it.
Well, politicians do not bear the consequences of their own actions.
So you think it's just on the politicians?
Well,
it has nothing to do with being that fearful of the media.
Loads of fun spending other people's money. Oh, well, let's buy this, let's buy that, let's buy the other. But they don't spend. So when you look at them and ask them to do good policy, What's in it for them? Nothing.
Yeah, probably
I mean,
not.
you remember Jimmy Stewart and
you got to bring home goods, right?
In Jimmy,
Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Yeah.
Goes in there with the soul of human kindness in his heart. Wants to be. He brings down the inflation rate. He brings down interest rates. He brings up the stock market. He brings down the unemployment rate. The enemies of America are thrown offshore and everything. He does all these wonderful things. Orphanages are emptied as the people got adopted, and the trees blossomed. They bore fruit. The animals multiplied. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
What happened to Jimmy Stewart's salary? Nothing. Now imagine his evil twin comes in.
Right.
The evil twin does everything wrong.
Yeah.
Inflation goes up. Unemployment goes up. The interest rates go up. The enemies of America are coming forward. All the children die. The trees are barren. And blah, blah, blah. What happens to that guy's salary? Nothing. The problem is these guys don't have a stake in the policies they make. Now, you and I and everyone else on earth who has a brain knows that if you are in a position of immense political power, you're going to get rich.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to get rich.
No question.
No. Now, the question is, how are you going to get rich? My view has always been, I don't mind politicians getting rich at all. I do not, as long as I do too.
It reminds me so much of Animal Farm.
Well, it is like Animal Farm, and they
George
will do it.
Orwell. Yeah.
And they will do all the stuff, and there'll be crooks and all that stuff because that's the way they get rich.
Yeah.
And no politicians has ever died poor. So how do we align their incentives with ours? Now, my view is we should put politicians on commission.
Put them on commission.
Let me give you an example.
That's fascinating.
If the economy grows, I'm just hypothetical example. If the economy grows at 3%, you get your pay fair and square. Bum! If it grows at 4%, double your pay.
Nice.
5%, triple your pay. However, 2%, no pay this year. 1%, you owe us the money that you would have normally gotten paid.
Right.
All of a sudden, they have a stake in the game. They can become very rich by creating great prosperity, by creating goodness. I mean, you can do it as unexercised stock options or whatever you want. Take the S&P 500 the day you
It
take
works in the
off
private sector.
the S&P you take, and you get the difference.
Yes.
I mean, there are just lots of ways of doing this. And the question is, I want to make it so that they get rich by making us rich, which is the right way to do it. Rather than doing it the way they now do it, they get rich by stealing and corrupting, or passing laws that allow them to exempt themselves or their sons or daughters or husbands or wives. I mean, no mention of names. You don't need to mention names. I would do it. They would do it. Everyone else does it. That's why I made a vow after I worked in the Nixon White House as George Shultz's right-hand person, if you'll remember, 70 to 72, when he was head of the OMB, and then with him as Secretary of the Treasury as well. And, when I made a vow never to take another penny from a politician, I mean, I can't take a government paycheck because once you take a paycheck, you're an employee.
Yeah, you're done.
And then you are obligated to serve your boss.
Can we take a quick break? This is really great stuff. Dr. Art Laffer along today with Dr. Art Laffer, legendary founder of Supply-Side Economics, economic advisor to President Ronald Reagan, and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Speaking of which, one of the things that we do in economics all the time is we look out a sample for things. Get out of just the United States. If these things may work in the United States, but there's something special with the United States. I mean, we got different type of workforce, different type of education system, but do taxes actually the same effect do they have over in those other countries? And what did you find when you looked over other countries?
It is amazing that they do. Let me do Thatcher. I mean, when Thatcher came in, and I'm going to exaggerate a little bit here, but the highest marginal income tax rate was 98%.
That's insane.
People would borrow suits instead of buying them, would lease the suits because they could deduct the lease. And it was just amazing, all that stuff. She, at first thing, what she did was she substituted product taxes for income taxes, all right? What they call external and internal taxation. And she did that. It had no effect. It was not a good bill in 1980. And she was in trouble. Then along came the Falklands, which saved her. But then she did the great one. She taught the highest marginal income tax rate in Britain from, I say 98% down to 40%. So the last one was from 60 to 40. Boom, you had this huge boom. I mean, Britain experienced like nothing before. It was just amazing. Then, of course, she left office. She called him Prime Minister Gray. That was Major.
Right.
She called him Prime Minister Gray, not Prime Minister Major.
What
He was.
what is
he was
it
bland.
with? What was that?
He was bland.
Oh,
she
okay.
was very gray.
I
as
gotcha.
being bland.
I gotcha. I gotcha.
They called
I gotcha.
them wets over in England or whatever
All right.
else.
All right.
And then, of course, in came Tony Blair and Gordon Brown.
Uh-huh.
Gordon Brown raised the highest marginal tax rate from 40p to 50p. The economy went to hell in a handbasket. They went out, and then Cameron came in,
Right.
and they did a big section there in the Exchequer, which is our treasury,
Right.
about the Laffer Curve, the Laffer effect in Britain.
Right.
And revenues went way down. When they get from 40p to 50p, revenues went down. The economy went to the hell in a basket. Bump. And then Cameron, the wet that he was too,
Yeah.
he only, well, then let's just drop it from 50 to 45p. Oh, I'm a scary, that's
Yeah,
still,
big deal.
Well, they should have made it much lower than that.
Right.
Chile, the same thing. When we went in there, it was we went in there with Pinochet, and he was after. You had God, what was his name? Allende. Allende was the
Okay.
one, and then
Okay.
Pinochet put in a fixed exchange rate, lowered taxes, privatized. We sold something like 5,000, 10,000 companies that had been nationalized in there, and you can see Chile is the best performing economy for 30 plus years in South America.
Uh-huh.
Again. Outside of the U.S., it even works better. It's different.
Why did they not remember that? I
Well,
look
they
back
do.
at what over there. Why
They
do
do.
they not?
They just 30
remember,
years
but they
this-
just don't
they
care
all
because it
died.
doesn't. There's no reason to do it.
Well, the reason is that all the people who experienced it died. That's what happens in
is
1,000 years.
That's it.
It's purely insignificant. And their kids don't remember because they weren't in it.
They didn't experience it. That
Eduardo
makes
Frei,
sense.
who was the head of Chile, president of Chile before Allende, and then you got Pinochet. Then you got Eduardo Frei Jr., who was left-wingy, and now he reversed it. It's
Now,
just
it amazes me because in your book you talk a little bit about the Depression, and I want to get into that next, talking a little bit more about
great.
the Depression.
Well, let's get into the
because
depression. Depression's a big deal.
So many lessons there.
Yes.
And it blew my mind that you said that state tax rates were higher than what they are on the federal level back in that point in time. And what
in
effect did that have?
1932.
Yeah, that
Local taxes.
great chart.
Local.
That was a great chart.
Local taxes
Yes.
were more than federal and state taxes combined. This is property taxes.
What a difference. And
Right. Property taxes were there. We're once again in a big property tax environment here today, again in the U.S., just for the record.
right.
But, all the income taxes that were put into effect during the Great Depression, all the sales taxes that were put into effect, corporate taxes that were put into effect. I mean, we called that chapter Unindicted Co-Conspirators. Let me take you through the income tax rates at the time.
Well, let's do that. Let's take a quick break and
Okay,
come
let's
back
take a
because
break.
you were talking about the property taxes in there, and you were talking about how people couldn't even pay the property taxes during the Depression. That was
Tragic.
fascinating.
It's just enough to cry.
So let's do that. All right, we are back here on the Investor Coaching Show. I am Paul Winkler, talking world of money and investing, here with the one and only Dr. Art Laffer. The supply got, trickle down. You probably hated that
No,
term.
I don't
Did
hate
you
it.
not hate that term?
Hey, just as long as they don't say my mom's a bad word or something, I'm okay with anything. You can call me anything you want, but it's right.
Yeah, I know it is.
Everyone knows it is.
I know it is. But,
Even
but they have to
socialists.
demonize it.
Can I tell you the socialist one?
What's that?
Socialist, Fabian socialist. I mean, way out there. I tried to figure out what was the most Fabian socialist state in America.
What is it?
Massachusetts. Has to be.
Yeah,
And then I tried to find the most Fabian socialist city in Massachusetts. Cambridge.
Okay.
Has to be.
That makes sense.
Then I had to find the most Fabian socialist institution in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Okay.
Harvard.
Of course.
And then I had to find this Fabian socialist department in Harvard, in Cambridge, in Massachusetts. And of course, it's sociology.
Okay. Sociology.
Sociology department. Then I had to find the most Fabian socialist moment
Okay.
of the sociology department, Harvard University, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Okay.
And it was.
And I found this moment. And so I went home and I got a pillowcase and I stuffed it full of $20 bills.
Okay.
Tied it pink. I went out to Nashville Airport, flew to Logan,
Uh-huh.
got off there, took an Uber to Harvard. I walked over to the sociology department there. It was right on the green there. The moment was Bernie Sanders was giving a speech.
Oh, boy.
He was just finishing his speech. All the people with their hair flopping, drowned up, just all wild and crazy out in the front lawn. Elizabeth Warren was there doing an Indian dance. I mean, it was just amazing. of all this sort of stuff. So I took a little wooden chair, I unfolded it, I took it over there downwind. And I took my pillowcase and undid it. And they all were screaming and hollering, for everyone equal all to him, tax the rich, the top one. Oh, it was everything perfect. And he finished, the cheers were up. And I took my pillowcase full of $20 bills, flew it up in the air, and the $20 bills floated over the crowd and then sank in the crowd. 30 seconds later, there wasn't a $20 bill anywhere.
That's what we call a teachable moment.
A teachable moment. Even lefties love incentives.
Yeah.
It picked up every. That's why I know we're going to win.
Right.
The only thing you can rely on is whether you hate them or not, incentives matter. And they determine what happens. Even with super lefties, there is no socialist alive in his heart or her heart.
So you are optimistic.
Two
we
guys
are going to get
and
this.
A pretty girl. Socialists, they'll fight to the death for the pretty girl, just like we would.
Right. So
it's just human nature to be.
Well, you're the eternal optimist. So you're
it's not optimistic. Do you think I'm wrong on that?
No.
If you dropped a $20 bill, do you think a socialist would pick it up?
My audience
In a
knows.
heartbeat.
My audience knows. I always say that optimism is the most rational thought process.
See, I don't want to be optimistic or pessimistic. I want to be realistic, and I think I'm realistic. Sooner or later, all these socialist countries collapse. They all collapse.
I got a question for you.
Sure, please.
So tariffs.
Yes.
This is something that was used pretty significantly through our history. The Great Depression, we go back to the Depression. What were some of the mistakes of the Depression? Also, I want you to comment on some of the more recent tariffs and whether you agreed with them, disagreed with them.
Well, let me start off with the history. The tariff was a revenue-raising source for the federal government, and it was a broad-based tax that it was done there. And in that sense, as long as you need money for the government, that was as good a way to raise money as any. It wasn't a protectionist type of tariff. It was a revenue raiser to run government. That is, once you get to the Great Depression, what we did was, in 1913, they supposedly put in the income tax to offset a tariff, to reduce tariffs, and it was a trade-off there. But 1929, we had something proposed in the House and the Senate called the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which was the largest tax increase on traded products in U.S. history. It passed the House and the Senate in the fourth quarter of 1929, and then was signed into law in June 1930 by Herbert Hoover. And, of course, the economy just went straight down. The stock market fell by 35% in the fourth quarter of 1929. I mean, it went on down to fall by almost 95%.
Well, right, in anticipation.
Well, it did it.
It
did it in anticipation. Then the crash came. And with the crash, of course, by then, at that time, we were collecting money only in April for the previous year's income. So we had no problem in 1930. Because there was the revenue came from 29.
Hadn't come down.
And then 1931 in April, no revenue came in. The big panic in the federal government. We need to make the U.S. economy sound. We need the federal government to be solvent, all that stuff.
Yeah.
They raised the highest marginal income tax rate on January 1st, 1932. Now think of this. They raised it from 25% to 63%. They raised it again to 79% on January 1st, 1936, on up to 94% in 1944. 94. Every dollar you earned, you were allowed to keep 6 cents. You'll wonder why it was the longest, deepest depression. They put in the capital gains tax, an unearned income tax. They put in the death tax. They put in the gift tax. They put in a retained earnings tax, 12.5% per year. Right. I mean, if it crawled, they taxed it. If it flew, they taxed it. If it swam, they taxed it. If it ran, they taxed it. If it slept, they taxed it. They taxed every. And of course, it was the longest, deepest depression ever because of taxes. Pure and simply. Taxes first on traded products and then taxes on income, and they just knocked the whole system on its ass. And the World War II, the recovery.
Right.
real
You point that out
wages,
well in your book. Yes.
Real wages, consumable wages had regressed to back where they had been a century earlier. People worked.
Well, you had a deflation during the Depression, and people's incomes actually went up because the dollar bought more because of the deflation. It was insane.
The whole thing was a terrible thing there. And even when we came out of World War II, we passed 3 tax cuts. All 3 Truman vetoed. All 3 did. Thank God the third one that he vetoed, the Senate and the House passed it over his veto and got the rate from 94% down to 82%.
Yeah.
And then we had a little recovery there. And then he raised it because of the Korean War, he raised it back up to 92%.
Right.
And then Eisenhower left it there for the full 8 years of Eisenhower. What a loser that guy was.
So then you have tariffs in general, protection type
Well,
tariffs.
protection and tariffs are not synonymous.
I was going to say, what is your opinion on that?
Well, you know, a
Yes.
low-rate, broad-based flat tariff is a reasonable revenue raiser. Low-rate, broad-based.
Okay.
You know, same thing for an income tax, same thing for a sales tax, any of those low-rate, broad-based. So you provide people the least incentives to evade, avoid, or otherwise not report the taxable income.
Yeah.
And you give them the least place. But once you start protecting things, then you screw up the whole efficiency of the economy and you don't get the revenues.
Right.
And that's exactly what Smoot-Hawley was. If you looked at that legislation, I mean, it is amazing. Silk handkerchiefs with embroidery on the first three corners, and each one of these things, thousands and thousands of categories with different tariffs on them and all of it. It was just the worst ever. It was a big orgy on businesses trying to protect
Well, you talk
themselves.
about art and architecture and all of that, how they spend all this money on this great art and architecture. But the reality of it is the private sector did that kind of thing anyway. You know, you talk about that in the book. Question for you regarding this. I've got, you know, something that from a financial planning standpoint.
Well, I
a lot
thought
of
you were
people-
going to have me had tariffs on about right now and sanctions on China and Russia and
Yeah.
tariffs.
Yeah, go ahead.
Of course
You
you
do that
shouldn't do
first.
that. Of course sanctions and tariffs are not political weapons against
I was
adversaries.
curious what you thought about
You know,
that.
you know,
Okay.
you got the Bhagwati theorems, which is if you've got a problem, use a direct cure, not an indirect cure. If you've got a problem at the border, if you got perfectly reasonable to use tariffs. But if you've got a drug problem, let's say with fentanyl,
Yes.
don't use border taxes to try to interdict it. No, you've got to cure the demand. Believe me, if you
Cure the
if you
demand.
try to correct
Yes.
it at the border, you're just going to bid the price up, and it will ultimately guarantee it'll make it.
So how do you cure the demand for these products? Like,
Well,
for
let me give you an
China?
example in drugs. I mean, private have the government supply freely
Uh-huh.
all drugs if you can prove you're a drug addict to the government. But you can't take any drugs out with you. You got to go in there, get your dose, and then you can leave. So you take away the whole market for pushers, and
Sure.
drug pushers. You can eliminate. That's the way
Can't
to
walk
solve
out
it.
of it. Yeah.
All right, but you've got to eliminate the demand for the drugs. That's what's
Right.
we have a consumption problem with drugs,
Well, how
not
about
a production problem.
well, how about the demand for Chinese products, though? You know, for example,
Wonderful. What's wrong with Chinese products?
well, certain ones that they're worried about regarding prescriptions, those types of things, sensitive things.
If you've
like,
got a problem that you're going to deal with every country the same way on
Mm-hmm.
prescriptions or whatever it is, fine. I would not. I would perfectly willingly agree with you. We should not sell nuclear weapens to Kim Jong Un.
yeah,
Okay, let me just
technology
put it-
products, things like that.
Well, you know, technology like a radio.
right.
How about like shoes? What you want to do is make sure you maintain trade because trade is much. Do you like your customers?
Yes.
Everyone
obviously.
does.
Yes.
You know, what you want to do is you want to make sure that they like us, we like them. We meet together. We have birthday cards. We explain to them that what they're doing with the Uyghurs is incorrect. Please change your ways and work logically. And they might just have some suggestions for us too.
Yeah.
You know, investments of Chinese investments in the U.S. God bless you. The more investments China has in the U.S., the less likely they are to bomb us. You know, who wants to kill their customers?
True.
You know, we need to trade with Russia, with China, with Iran, with North Korea. We need to. Now, I think very seriously they're bad people. Their governments aren't good.
Right.
I mean, but that's why we have a Defense Department and a State Department. I
did-
believe strongly in the Reagan doctrine. You know, peace through strength.
right.
And strength means a big defense budget. You know, I'm a real Kennedy guy, so forgive me on this. But the best form of defense spending is always wasted whenever you find yourself in a situation where you were required to use your military hardware and prowess.
Uh-huh.
That is a clear sign you did not spend enough.
Mm.
I want to be so heavily
Interesting
armed
point.
that no one will ever attack. Do you think,
Star
honestly,
Wars. It made me think of Star Wars.
well, yeah, Star Wars was Reagan. That
Yeah,
was it. And by the way,
exactly.
did we have a war? No. Did we have a war right after
No,
Trump
they
left?
spent themselves into oblivion because they were afraid of what was coming their way.
Yeah.
in
Do you
Russia.
think?
Sure.
Do you think Russia would have gone into Ukraine if Trump had still been president?
Lord,
No. I mean, you know, what you want to do is you want to make sure you're the strongest. But don't mess around with tariffs. Don't mess around with quotas. Don't mess around with all the other stuff. Just build a strong defense.
I want to say, next thing I want to switch to right after this break, and this will be the final segment, but I want to talk a little bit about your thoughts regarding consumption taxes and the likelihood of these consumption
Got it.
taxes. Let's do that right after this. You're
I'm
listening.
excited.
Good. All right. We are back here on the Investor Coaching Show, and I'm Paul Winkler. Along here with Dr. Art Laffer. If you've heard of supply side economics or the great boom that occurred in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan, you know Dr. Art Laffer's work because he was his economic advisor. And that's what we're talking about right now is tax policy. Now, one of the things that, in financial planning, big push out there, and I tell people really be careful about this, is convert your IRAs to Roth IRAs. Pay the taxes now because tax rates are going to be higher in the future. And one of the things I have this a little bit of an inkling about is the possibility of the government saying, hey, let's reduce the tax rates, but then we'll give you something in place of that, consumption taxes, so as to make sure that we still have revenue coming in. But that's how they'll sell it, is lowering those tax rates. And then you will have paid taxes at a higher rate right now on your IRAs just to avoid a lower rate in the future. I don't trust necessarily government policy, and I'm curious what you think about it.
Not trusting the government is a sign of intelligence. But let me do two things. One is the consumption tax, which I'd love to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
And the other one is let's talk about global warming and a carbon tax.
All right.
Because both those are really big deals. Mm-hmm. There's no difference between an external and an internal tax or a direct or an indirect tax. Mm-hmm. What's the difference if I tax you 50% of your income? All right, and that's it. Mm-hmm. From $1 to $N, mm-hmm. or if I put on a sales tax of 100% add-on sales tax. Mm-hmm. They're both the same. The reason you earn income is to buy goods and services. Right. And if you tax it at income, it's the same as taxing it when you buy it. Those problems. The only thing that's different about these consumption taxes versus income taxes versus value-added taxes, mm-hmm. and they're all three very similar.
Yes.
Is how expensive is it to collect it?
Right.
Then what you want to do is get the least cost to collecting the taxes so that you have the most left over. Okay. That's all I would argue. Mm-hmm. I did Jerry Brown's flat tax, as I mentioned, when he ran for president. And, I used an income tax and a VAT rather than a consumption tax.
Value-added tax, yeah.
When whatchamacallit came, who was the 999?
Oh, yeah, Herman Cain.
Herman Cain.
Yes.
When he came to my office, heard my proposal with the two taxes, he took his consumption tax and made three taxes, which he added up to 999 instead of,
sure, right.
But same difference. It doesn't matter except for the cost of collection.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing I'd look at. And there's not going to be a hell of a lot of difference in the cost of collection. Let me go to carbon taxes.
Right.
Do you believe in global warming?
Do I believe in it? I remember global cooling in the 1970s. They said the satellite data said we were going to have an ice age.
And they still
I think there's climate's always changing.
Yeah, well, it does. I don't know whether there's global warming. It's way outside of my ken.
It's above my
my pay grade too.
Yeah,
now there are people. Al Gore is one of my dearest friends.
Okay.
I did a blurb for his latest book called The Future. Uh-huh. There were three of us: E.O. Wilson, myself, and Berners-Lee, who did the blurbs there. He's a great guy, really a polymath. He believes in global warming. He thinks it's there. He may be right.
Yeah.
But let me just tell you, if there were global warming, how would you solve it? You do it two ways. You'd say
hydrogen fusion.
What you do is you wouldn't worry about alternatives, private market. You'd tax carbon.
Uh-huh.
You'd tax carbon emissions. Now, why would you not want to tax carbon emissions? Because it'll kill the economy.
Right.
Boom. So Al Gore and I agreed on something on this.
Yeah.
What we agreed on is we'd have a carbon tax to change people out of carbon into non, but we would offset it with an income tax, dollar for dollar, cut the income tax rate. Mm-hmm. So there's no net tax at all. I would go for a carbon tax over an income tax every day of the week and twice on Sunday. All you need to do is have a tax switch. You get rid of all of my complaints about a carbon tax, even though I don't know whether there's global warming or not. I don't. I do believe that the chances of having too much carbon in the atmosphere is higher risk than too little carbon in the atmosphere.
Well, it is fascinating the way taxes have actually driven technology in different areas.
They do everywhere.
And all of a sudden it starts to people, and that brings up another topic as real quickly before we finish, is AI. People say that the Industrial Revolution is where you actually replaced work, which was physical labor, and now you have machines doing the work. And a lot of people are very scared about this idea of artificial intelligence because you're replacing mental labor with machines, so to speak.
Oh, yeah, it's terrible to get all your goods free, wouldn't it be? Oh, my. It's like these people who want to boycott Japan.
Optimism on this. That's why I wanted to ask you.
They want to boycott Japan because they're selling goods too cheaply to us. What?
Right.
If you find a store that sells you high-quality products at low cost, would you shop there or not?
Yes.
Would you love that store?
Yes.
Of course. If Japan said, "Oh, America, we love you so much. We're going to give you all of our cars free of charge to you. It's a gift just to tell you how much we." No, you dirty bastards. We're going to bomb you for that. How dumb can Americans be? Cheap imports are wonderful for us. They provide us with a much better standard of living at lower work effort. It's, the world around us is not about jobs. It's about consumption.
Yeah.
And if we could get all the things we wanted to do for free, we'd have schmooze. Remember little Abner Schmoo, Al Cap schmooze?
Yes.
If we got would you kill all the schmooze because they took away people's jobs? And they eliminated hunger, poverty, despair, and racism and everything else in this.
Are you going to be able to get people's attention in Washington regarding this?
You tell me that. Have I ever had any effects in Washington?
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Maybe again.
Maybe you can again.
Maybe.
I like it.
Have you known any other economist who has?
Yeah, I suppose.
No, not many.
Well, I wasn't thinking positively. I was thinking Keynes.
Well, Keynes did, but he didn't actually do it.
Well, okay.
When you look at that stuff, all over, everyone talks transparency. All these things are all supply side economics and how to solve the problems there. And one thing you can see about me, and I know we're coming to the end, is I hate losing. And I love winning.
Well, that's what is inspiring about
Prop
you.
13, Reagan's tax cuts, Thatcher's tax cuts, Chile, Argentina, when we did the whole stuff there. We did all the stuff in the states. Look at Tennessee here. It's just phenomenal what's happened here in Tennessee. We got rid of the gift and estate tax when I got here. We get rid of the hall tax, and now we're going to put in a property tax limitation into Tennessee to make it the perfect state. I love winning. And I love winning only if it's the right thing to do.
It is an example around the country that you wonder why other states don't look at that and say, this makes sense. Do they not want to grow or what?
Well, they do. It's just not all of them.
Well, just not all of them.
Well, Texas is doing pretty well. Florida's doing all right.
Well, that's true.
No,
There are a couple.
Nevada's doing all right. New Hampshire's okay.
we can't
South Dakota's, you can't knock them for that. I mean, what else do you want?
We can't explain California, though.
Yes,
Paul
we can.
Winkler,
I can explain it if you want it. 1 second.
Oh, 1 second.
All right. Prop 13 is a property tax limitation. If you buy a home, you're guaranteed on low taxes on that home forever. 2% maximum growth in tax bill, 1% maximum limit on there. Unearned realized capital gains, non-taxable. When you sell the house, you get a $500,000 exemption. It's preferred income. And if you happen to die and pass it on to your state, you get a stepped-up basis. It's the breathing hole that allows prosperity to exist in California's Prop 13. If they get rid of that, they're dead. They're West Virginia in 6 weeks.
Dr. Art Laffer, Paul Winkler, he is the writer of the book, Taxes Have Consequences. You need to check this out at your local bookstore. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. Good to see you, sir.
Pleasure.
Thank you.